From Homs to Aleppo, you drive through a thin strip of Syrian government territory. To the left are the rebels, both moderates and al-Qaeda-style militants of Jabhat al-Nusra. To the right, the extremists of Islamic State. As we approached the Syrian artillery position, they were firing right over our heads. The Russians aren't just bombing here, their soldiers are on the ground. But they don't like being filmed, so you do it discreetly. They've done their job in Aleppo, where the rebels were driven out 7 months ago after a siege and bombing that laid waste to the old city. Now the historic citadel towers over devastation. From up here on the citadel steps, you get an astonishing sense of the geography. That's West Aleppo, where we were reporting from during the fighting, and this is where the rebels made their last stand in the east of the city. Now, the historic fort of the citadel itself was always kept in the hands of the Syrian army, but you can see how the rebels fired on it in futility, really. But those walls are marked with gunfire. Now, those on the winning side come back to marvel at how their medieval palace survived. The only shots being fired here are selfies.
أنا هون بلدي، هون وطني، هون الأم.
عشان نشوف القلعة.
لا هون على القلعة.
يعني.
عشان أشوف القلعة، صار لي زمان ماني شايفتها.
So where were you during the fighting? Were you here during the war?
هون أنا ما رحت، أنا هون ما تحركت، بسوريا ما طلعت ولا قادرت هون بسوريا من وقت الاشتباكات لهلا هون أنا.
والحمد لله انتصرنا.
But the cleanup doesn't go far. Within footsteps, you're in East Aleppo's bombed-out streets. And within seconds, I was stopped by Dalal Bego, desperate to tell her story. Where do you live?
هنيك بالأصيلة عند الدرج. درج عريض هيك الحارة كلها خربانة.
Can you take me to your house? Can I see it?
هل باستطاعتك إنه تورجينا البيت؟
إيه امشي تعالوا تفضلوا.
تفضلوا
تعالوا. تعالوا أورجيك بيتي تعالوا.
Dalal is one of more than 200,000 people trying to live in these ruins. She stayed throughout the war, leaving for just 1 week at the very climax in December.
طلعنا والله يا خيو. كنا باركين ببيوتنا رزقنا وما معنا نحط إيجارات.
This is what she came back to. This is your house.
هذا بيتك؟
ايه هاد كله. ذاك بيت الجيران. مساحته 162 متر. هون غرفتين. هون خايط هي غرفة وهون غرفة. وهون غرفة وهون غرفة. وهون المطبخ والتواليت والحمام هون.
During the fighting, the government kept telling you to leave here. They were dropping leaflets from the sky saying you must get out. Why didn't you get out?
مو سكر القطرق يا خيو. السكر القطرق ما بقدر يطلع، ما بقدر يطلع واحد والله يا خيو. لا ردنا نطلع. ردنا نطلع. والله ردنا. أما طلعت هالعالم كلياته وقت فتحوا القطرق طلع العالم كلها طلعت.
Dalal has no idea how she will rebuild. She registered with the local authority. They gave her a receipt and said come back in a year. How so much of this city will be rebuilt is a mystery. It will take billions. Until it was bombed in the autumn of 2016, the Al-Quds was the main hospital for East Aleppo during the war. The basement rooms turned into operating theatres and even maternity units. Now it is an eerie shell, the debris of makeshift emergency rooms lying scattered around. It is where much of the footage seen on Channel 4 News of civilians caught in the bombing was filmed. It's all been on fire here. You can feel what horrors took place here when the war was at its peak. And yet, just around the corner, there is life in East Aleppo, and shops, and people rebuilding their lives. Maher Basel is another who refused to leave throughout the war, saying he feared his family home for generations would be looted or taken over if he'd gone. He says it was deprivation that drove some of his neighbours to support the rebels.
طبعا وفي مدنية كتير وفي كتير بعرفهم يعني الوضع انه نحن جيل ينتقص للفكر.
The main challenge for Maha's family now is living without basic infrastructure. There's no running water. His only electricity comes from a generator. At night, East Aleppo once again looks a frightening place, surrounded by the ghosts of war. But it is also a test for how the Syrian government runs cities after they've been retaken. There is no reconciliation here because those who supported the rebels have been bussed away to Idlib and will not be allowed back. The ground seems increasingly to be laid for permanent division. Well, with me now is the MP for Aleppo, Faraz Shahabi, and it's a great shame that the lights have gone off on the citadel that had just come back. But let's talk about the symbolism and the importance of this announcement from Trump and Putin, that there is a small and limited ceasefire in the southwest. What real difference does that make?
Well, it makes a lot of difference because we can free now forces to go eastwards to liberate a lot of land from ISIS, especially Deir ez-Zor and Mayadeen, which is now becoming the new capital after Mosul.
And Deir ez-Zor is just down the river from Raqqa, and it appears the American-backed forces have got there first. Now, if they do take Raqqa, what happens then?
Well, they cannot sustain presence in Raqqa because Raqqa is predominantly Sunni Arab, and these are predominantly Kurdish forces. They will have to rely on the Syrian army in one way or another. They cannot sustain presence there, as I said.
So you're saying the Americans should hand it over to the Russian-backed Syrian forces, effectively?
Well, it's not they should or they shouldn't. This is international law. The American or any NATO presence in Syria is illegal. So basically, Raqqa or any other city where they are should be handed over to the Syrian government. This is the legitimate Syrian government. And one more thing, this is, you said earlier, this here wasn't rebel held, this was Nusra held territory, where we at now. Most of the people here, the 15,000 that were here, the extremists, yes, they were here in this area.
And they are now not far away. So
they
what
are
happens
not far
to them?
away. Well, their turn will come. Now the priority is to fight ISIS, and we are benefiting from the 4 zones, like the low tension zones, so we can free a lot of forces to fight ISIS, push ISIS, get rid of ISIS, and then we will turn to this Nusra area like when we were before the new ISIS advancement, and we will continue to liberate.
You have got most of your city back, but many of the people who you said were your people have left. They've gone with the rebel forces to Idlib.
Actually,
so how can you ever restore the full balance of this city?
Actually, most of the people from the eastern parts of Aleppo are around you now. They are here. Who left from Aleppo, who left in the evacuation when the raid took place in December in 2016, 5,000 people only out of the city of 3 million. Only 5,000 people from Aleppo left with the Nusra when they evacuated to Idlib. And so basically the Aleppo people are returning.
And how many killed?
More people are returning.
How many killed?
I don't know how many killed. A lot of people were killed. A lot of these Nusra fighters were killed. 5,000 civilians that are Islamic Brotherhood, minded, went with them. The remaining people from Eastern Aleppo were able to come back. Actually, 90,000 people just last month came back.
Whatever happens in the rest of the country as you're taking more territory, and there's no doubt you are, the West, well, Washington and London, still wants there to be a reckoning with President Assad. They still say he can't be part of the future long term.
Well, it's not what they say. We don't care really what they say.
You just don't care?
We just don't care. It's what we say. We want anyone who wants to rule our country has to go through the ballot boxes. We have a parliament, we have a constitution. It's not any country in NATO that can appoint our presidents. We choose our president.
But how can you restore Syria to some sort of international balance when half the world thinks its president is a war criminal?
Well, first of all, half the world or quarter of the world, it is when they stop meddling with our affairs and stop supporting terror groups. They've been calling the Nusra moderate rebels. Look at. I just remind you of the Channel 4, which they owe us an apology.
Well, let's not get into history.
Listen. No. In December, the coverage was moderate rebels fighting the Assad regime forces. It turned out that these moderate forces were Nusra. They are now in Idlib. It turned out that the majority, 1 million people of Eastern Aleppo, are coming back to Eastern Aleppo. It turned out that we unified the city, and the first time in 6 years we can stand here in front of the city.
Faraz Shahabi, we're not going to reopen that old argument, but thank you very much indeed for coming on tonight.